All right, at this point, I hope you have answered those three questions. What I would like to do in this video is kind of debrief and talk to you a little bit about the challenges that are brought up through this exercise, this lunchroom, imaginary lunchroom fight. You see, people might see or remember the same event differently. How is that possible? I mean, think for a moment. Do you remember the Laurel versus Yanni audio clip that made the rounds a couple of years ago, where you could listen to an audio clip and some people swore they heard the name Yanni and other people swore that they heard the name Laurel? Or imagine the vest or the dress. Is the dress white and blue, or gold and black, or something like that? Now, how is it possible for two people to see the same thing and perceive it completely differently? How is that possible in this lunchroom fight scenario? Well, there are a lot of different ways that people can perceive things differently, based off of location, about perspective. Is it possible that one person has an interest in one kid getting into trouble more than another kid? Imagine if it was the girlfriend of the boy who's in a fight who is willing to remember things through a different lens, a different perspective. Does the location of where one was standing maybe matter? Maybe if you're standing behind the people, you couldn't see the face, you couldn't see the words that were mouthed, you couldn't get the whole picture. And so if you can't see the whole event, even though for your truth you are describing what's happened, you're only providing a limited perspective. What about the plausibility of the stories? Is it possible for people to exaggerate, the whole fish that they caught? It was this big. Is it plausible that the stories fit into what is known about their own prior histories? Is the story believable? Is it trustworthy? Also consider time. Do stories change over time? And how might we remember, or what we remember right after the event differ from what we remember a week or 2 weeks or a month or a year later? Does the passing of time make the way someone remembers something more or less trustworthy? That's an important question. Do you believe someone in that moment before they've had time to process and think and compare stories with another? Which one is more trustworthy? Also consider something like physical evidence. What kinds of physical evidence might have an effect on what you believe? Would the presence of bruises or missing objects, would that help support somebody's claims? Look, the reason why we're talking about lunchrooms on the very first day in the very first lecture, you're probably asking, what does this have anything to do with history? I guess the point I want to make is that all of this is applicable to the study of the past. Right? The way that events are interpreted, the way that events are remembered, the way that events are explained, or the way that events are judged to be trustworthy. When we study history, this involves considering many different people's perspectives, but also considering their biases, right? Considering the evidence and the trustworthiness of that evidence. Just like the principle, as historians, we are trying to figure out what happened in the past. There may be many different versions of that story, many different perspectives, many people who were there who had a limited view of what happened. Some of these people are remembering things in the moment. Perhaps they wrote down, they took a picture, maybe there's even video footage. For other people, they're remembering what happened days or weeks or months or years later. Does that impact the trustworthiness of somebody who is explaining to us the past? So we're going to be thinking about this story in context with a lot of other things in this class. We're going to be considering things like evidence. And how do we determine what evidence matters? And why is evidence important? We're going to be considering things like the trustworthiness of the person. Is there something that we call bias? Can we figure out what that bias might be? And does that make the account less trustworthy? So what we've just done is we are largely focused on something called sourcing, or we're looking at the source. So, right, we're imagining that we have these different accounts of the same event, and we asked, how could these be different if no one is lying, right? So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at different types of evidence from eyewitnesses of this lunchroom fight. And we're going to see these eyewitnesses and how they are connected to the fight. Now, as you look through these sources, your job is to figure out who should get suspended for starting the fight. Is that clear? So we're going to be looking at this evidence. Your job is to determine who should be suspended. In order to figure this out, you're going to need to source, and you're going to need to contextualize and corroborate. In other words, you're going to need to read and compare multiple pieces of evidence in order to figure out which evidence are more reliable, which are less reliable, and how all of the evidence fits together to tell the story of what actually happened in the lunchroom that day. So what you'll find below are a series of stories or accounts. These are the accounts that you as principal received. I would like for you to read through them, and then I have a series of questions beneath that or next to that for you to answer.